Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You are listening to another installment of the NTC podcast. We're glad to have you guys back on for another installment. This is our 124th episode, and I'm Aaron Washington, your host. Glad to be back with you guys as we get started on another exciting NBA season. We are currently in the third week of the NBA season, and things are ramping up. Most teams have played somewhere between 6 and 8 games at this point. So we've been able to form a few opinions here and kind of get a feel for where teams stand today. And two of the teams that are making a lot of noise in the NBA for different reasons are the Milwaukee Bucks and the Cleveland Cavaliers. So to discuss these two teams, I have brought in, I think, one of the best people on the internet, on social media that covers the Bucks at a high level, does some great work at the Gyro Step Podcast. Ti Windisch is here joining me on this installment of the podcast. Ti and I go back a little bit of a ways here. He's also the network manager at Blue Wire Pods. We've done some work here in the past. It's been a hot minute, but I wanted to bring Ti back in to help us cover the Bucks and also the Cavaliers as far as what they've been doing so far this season and what we can expect from them going forward. So, Ti, I want to thank you again, man, for joining me on the pod. I'm glad we get to catch up a little bit here again, talk about these two teams, see where they're at today, and kind of just form some opinions about what's been going on, man. So I really appreciate the time and hope things have been well on your side.
Yeah, Aaron. I mean, things have been good. I mainly do Bucks coverage there on the pod, so it's been uneven, I guess. So well, it's been even, just even in a losing direction for the Bucks, but things are good, with me with the coverage. So really appreciate the kind words and having me on the show.
Absolutely, man. We're, like I said, glad to have you. And, anytime that we can partner up with fellow pods that do really great work about the NBA or teams specifically, we always jump at the chance. So this should be a really great episode. So let's get right into it, man. Let's not waste any time getting to the Bucks and what they've been doing here so far. To put it lightly, it's been a little bit of a struggle here for them over the first 7 games or so of the season. Looking back to what they did last season, they finished with 49 wins. They didn't quite do as well as most were expecting. The expectations were for them to at least make a little bit of a playoff run here. That didn't quite happen. They lost in 6 games to the Indiana Pacers, suffered some injuries there to Giannis and Dame towards the end of the season. And coming into the season, at least for me, I don't know about you, Ti, but I was confident that the Bucks would come in and start to turn things around after last season. Damian Lillard came in, and it can be hard for a player of that caliber to make a switch playing with a guy like Giannis, lower usage rate, not having the ball in his hands as much. They switched coaches in the middle of the season, going from Adrian Griffin over to Doc Rivers. So I thought that they would be able to kind of iron out those kinks since everybody had a full training camp to get things sorted. I was high in the offseason pickups, bringing in Taurean Prince, bringing in Gary Trent Jr., and free agency, both those guys on the minimum. I thought they were really good moves to kind of solidify their depth a little bit. Unfortunately, it hasn't quite translated to the court so far. Their offensive rating stands at about 19th today, according to Basketball Reference, and their defense is at 22nd, and giving them a net rating of about negative 6.5. That puts them in the bottom 5 of the league. So the numbers are not very high on the Bucks here. They did suffer some pretty bad losses in the beginning. After that win against the Sixers to start the season, they fell to the Bulls and Nets back to back. And then that Grizzlies game was just brutal. Dame suffered a 1 for 12 shooting performance, 4 points, one of the worst games of his career. But they did bounce back a little bit here in the last 2 games against the Cavaliers. So even though those were losses, there are some positive takeaways that we can gain from the result of those 2 games, which were both very close. And the Bucks had a great chance of winning both of those games. It just didn't quite go their way there in the last minute or 2 of the game. But I would say a bright spot or 2 bright spots of this team so far, Ti, definitely the leaders here. Giannis and Damian Lillard have been solid. Dame, except for that 1 for 12 game, he's been pretty solid here. So you're looking at a guy like Giannis to lead the charge. He's been doing that. He didn't miss the last game against the Cavaliers, but in the games he did play, 31, 12, and 6, 63% shooting, 4th in offensive, estimated plus minus according to dunks and threes, highest assist percentage of his career at 36%. You go across the board here and look at what he's been doing, all really good things. It's what you expect from a guy like Giannis. Damian Lillard here, 27 points a game, 4 rebounds, 6 assists. 52% from 2-point range, 39% from 3. So his percentages look really good here so far. And he's been Dame, like what people expect from him. So the problems aren't necessarily with them too. It really comes down to, I would say that the way they're playing right now, not having Middleton, the depth has been a little bit shaky, things like that. So, Ty, to turn over to you here, man, I want to get your thoughts on what you've seen so far in this season, specifically when it comes to some of the reserves and the role players. I know they've kind of been lacking a little bit to this point, but in these 7 games so far, what have been your big takeaways? And kind of expand a little bit more on the upward tick we've seen from this team in the last 2 games, those 2 face-offs against the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Yeah, I think the role players have by and large been very underwhelming. I think you're always worried about a player like Brook Lopez, falling off, so to speak. I actually think Brook's defense has been very good again, but he's had a slow start offensively, especially shooting the 3 ball. And that's been a trend for the Bucks. I think that has been one of the conflating factors with their 1-6 start is I think Gary Trent Jr. primarily just shooting well below and like even his, the low part of his bar. And obviously, a lot of sharpshooter players can be streaky, usually don't go 4 for 10 every night to shoot 40%. But I mean, really through now 7 games has just been well below what you would expect, especially based on, a better quality of look in Milwaukee. I mean, he tries to do some creation too, but a lot of these are just open shots because teams are so worried about Dame and Giannis. To your point earlier, those 2 have been phenomenal. That's actually, I think, like long term, a very encouraging thing because their partnership was creakier last season. They still won when they were on the court together, but it felt rare that they would both have, an extreme performance like 30, 10, and 10 or 30, 10, and 5 or whatever. They've done that now. I think they've kind of figured out how to click a little bit more and their give and take is a little bit more fluid. But the role players on the Bucks have just really struggled. Bobby Portis, who has never been like a strong defender, his shot has been really poor thus far from 3 and from 2. Trent Prince has actually shot the ball well, but just doesn't get that many shots. It feels like in their offense, his percentages are good, but I think he had like 2 or 3 points, in the second Cavs game. He's starting now. That's just tough production from a starter. Pat Connaughton, another player who coming off the bench has not shot the ball well so far. That's ticked a little bit up lately, but he has had a rough last regular season too. So I think some of it is just shooting the ball. And then of course, this is not a team that's rich in like foot speed and athleticism. I actually think with Chris Middleton out, they have no right to look as slow as they did, especially I would say the Chicago and Brooklyn games where it just felt like, this is a veteran team that has these big expectations. It felt like they just overlooked those 2 teams and they let the Nets and the Bulls outwork them and get in a rhythm, and then the Bucks just could not flip the switch back on. So I would say I think their most recent game against the Cavs, to your point, they both came down to the final minute, one with Giannis, one without. Cavs, of course, 8-0. We'll talk about them, but amazing start for the Cavs. So, no minor feat to be right there at the end of a game with them. And I thought the youth that the Bucks injected in, playing more Andre Jackson Jr., playing more AJ Green, who might be their best perimeter defender, and even giving Ryan Rollins some burn just because they needed more help guarding guards. It added so much, not just those guys individually, but to the rest of the lineups that you could just feel more energy. It makes, when Bobby Portis is like your 3rd best athlete on the floor or your 4th versus he needs to be one of those top 2 athletic players, it just changes the whole dynamic of the floor and the spacing and how much you can get back on defense. So I think they're finding some things that will work for them or that should work for them, or at least that can work for them going forward. But to start the year, I'd say, they have had too many of their wing players just kind of stuck in the mud, figuratively, as well as cold shooting that kind of then further compromises their defense because this is a team where I think we saw last season too. If they're making shots, they can defend in the half court. Okay. They're not going to be a great defense without Drew, but okay. When they're on these long cold spells and they're in transition or semi-transition, this is not a defense that can hold up. So I think kind of their problems compound together when they're not shooting the ball well, when they're not moving the ball enough, then I think their defense starts to look even worse.
Absolutely. It's interesting that the looking at the way they've been moving the ball, just kind of bouncing off your last point there. I looked at the number of assists per game based on what we've seen so far through 7 games compared to last season. According to Basketball Reference, they're 27th in assists so far, and that's a minus 17% rate compared to last year. So hopefully that will at least uptick a little bit. I know they're not going to be most likely not one of those teams that move the ball a ton, just because you have Damian Lillard, you have Giannis. When Middleton gets back, I'm sure that won't help. He likes to kind of just get in his spots and operate one-on-one quite a bit. But regardless, I mean, there are flashes that their offense can come around. We've seen that here and there, especially those last two games. I think they've been a lot better. And I totally agree with your points on the role players. I think they just need to be a little bit more consistent when it comes to shooting the ball. That's why they're there. That's the main reason why a lot of those guys are there. You don't rely on them to dominate the ball or create a lot of their own shots. You leave those to the big guns like Middleton when he gets back, and Bobby Portis and Dame and Giannis. But they do need to shoot the ball better, especially when they get open looks that are generated by those driving kicks by Giannis and Dame. And yet Gary Trent definitely struggling here with the 23% shooting. I mean, he's getting up 5.5 attempts per game. So, I mean, if he's going to be shooting that much, you would like to see more go down, especially since he's not going to put hardly any pressure on the rim. I looked at his rim rate this season so far, according to Cleaning the Glass. And, I mean, he's at about 9% right now, which is in the 8th percentile of everybody at his position in the NBA. So that's even lower than what we've come to expect from him. So the guy like Gary Trent, I mean, that jump shot can be a make or break for him. Defensively, he's okay, but he's really out there for the offense, just to space the floor, get a lot of threes up, and to convert them at a high rate that just hasn't been there. And then, yes, definitely when it comes to Prince, he is not getting a ton of attempts. He's only shooting about 3 per game when it comes to his threes, but he is at 56%. So I think he has delivered so far based on what the Bucks were looking for from him. And I expect that to continue, especially if he keeps getting those quality looks he's gotten so far. AJ Green, I want to touch on him for a second because I went back a little bit earlier and I watched that second game against the Cavs. 7 3-pointers, man, in 34 minutes. Really impressive stuff. 21 points. I wanted to ask you about his role because obviously his role was heavily influenced by the amount of injuries that the Bucks had going into the game. So I wouldn't expect him to get 34 minutes going forward. He had about 5 and 3 minutes in the last 2 games before that. But considering the level of shooting he brings to the floor, and you did mention his defensive capabilities, would you expect him to get a little bit more run going forward, even when some of those regulars get back into the rotation?
I think he's earned it, at least an opportunity at this point. I mean, I said on our last full episode I did with my co-host Rohan Kadi, I think he should start at the 2 next game. Like, I'm not going to give up on Gary Trent Jr. as a player by any means, but I think let's tweak where his minutes are coming a little bit, see if that can help get him going. And you just need results. I mean, you can't lose your whole season in November outside of like catastrophic injury or something. But you don't want to be 1-7. You don't want to be 1-8. At some point, it's like, okay, we feel good about some games. Like we were really close against the Cavs. They played okay against Boston. I mean, they led Boston at half and then fell apart in the third quarter. A lot of teams are going to lose in Boston this season, like they did last season, though. But those moral victories don't get you into the playoffs, right? You need to start winning games, and I think AJ Green has in that one game, given the Bucks more moments on both ends than Trent has really in the season thus far. I thought Trent started okay against Philly. I thought he defended Maxey better than expected, but his defense has been kind of here or there since. And again, they're not expecting him to do what Drew Holiday did for the Bucks, a couple of years ago. But I think screen navigation wise, he was just getting way too separated from Garland and Mitchell in a way that Green was actually doing much better. And I mean, in the third quarter, they were literally having AJ Green be the designated defender on Donovan Mitchell in the second half. I'm not going to sit here and say that he clamped Donovan Mitchell by any means, but Mitchell had 1 point in the second half. Like, he did a phenomenal job guarding him. He made him take tougher shots, and they didn't go in. They will go in most of the time for Donovan Mitchell. Again, I'm not trying to get crazy here with any sort of take, but you could see the difference. I mean, there was not the same degree of separation that Mitchell was able to get when Trent was his cover in the first half of that game. So 34 maybe is a little high, but there's not many players who have earned to play more minutes than AJ Green. And I think given what he gives you on both ends, like, as we're talking about the Bucks and their horrible shooting slump that they're dealing with, if he can give you that and at least as good, if not better, perimeter defense, I think he should play more. I mean, I think they need that burst right now. They need some of these young players to hit. I mean, the Bucks have been kind of torn up for not having enough development going on, but they have a couple of guys now, and Green and Jackson Jr., who I didn't draft Green. He was an undrafted free agent right after the draft a couple of years ago. But they seem like they're helping, and I think if you're already there, like let's just give them more minutes and see like can they help you and develop at the same time. That's always the dream, and I think those two players are kind of in a position to do that right now.
Yeah, I'm with you, Ty. I think of the phrase "desperate times, desperate measures" with this team because you just brought up the whole 1-6 record. Don't want to get any worse because that's a tough hill to climb for sure. Even in the Eastern Conference, the teams at the top. I mean, you definitely want to at least be home court advantage when it gets to playoff time. And if they get too far behind, I mean, the odds are going to be strongly against them. So the time is now to make changes. And yes, AJ Green's been great. Ajax too. Watching those games, I think Ajax brought a lot of energy, especially when he was doubling Giannis or doubling Dame in the backcourt and just trying to get those rebounds, just trying to make that extra play, getting his hands on some basketballs there in the game. I mean, he's actually, I would say he's kind of like a low key. I don't want to say rim protector, but I think for his position, he can actually make some plays at the rim defensively just with his crazy athleticism. And a couple times a game, you'll see him get above the rim for a rebound, and you're just like, man, like is this dude about to just throw one down right now? Like he's kind of one of those like X factors that can really make a difference here for the Bucks in those bench minutes. So yeah, I would like to see more of him as well. I was impressed by his minutes. Can definitely hit the occasional spot up three. I think that helps as well. But yeah, I mean, they got to hit some of these young guys, like you said, and it's not like they're going to have a ton more coming down the pipeline. I mean, you see the Bucks draft capital, and that's something we track on NTC at our website, and it's very clear that I mean, there's not much there just because of all the different moves they've made, and you do that every time. It's not a shot at them, but what young guys you do have, you need to see some progress, and there are some glimpses of progress there. So maybe it's time for some of the vets to have their minutes trimmed down a little bit. Gary Trent is one. DeLon Wright is another. He just has not had any success really. And I was a little bit sad that he didn't return to Miami. Just looking at some of the things he did for Miami, I was a little bit bummed. But for the Bucks, I mean, he hasn't really fit in all that well so far. Obviously, he's brought in for his defense more than offense. But I mean, 2 points a game, you expect a little bit more from a guy like that. That's going to play as many minutes as he was expected to coming in. So that's definitely a sticking point. But it all comes back to Middleton. I think at the end of the day, if Middleton is not back healthy, I think the ceiling for this Bucks team is severely limited. And he's just another great shot creator that is going to take some pressure off the others. The Bucks are not really flush with shot creators at the moment. They don't have a ton of guys that can make a play on the ball. So they miss him in a big way. And I mean, he shot 54% from the mid-range last season, averaging 15 points a game. He's pretty deadly when he's healthy. So what have you heard recently, Ty, about Middleton's status? And is there any hope for the Bucks getting him back anytime soon?
Yeah, it's we went from timelines and maybe he could play preseason or he would play opening night if it was a playoff game. And now we're a few weeks later and there's really no update. So we know he is playing. He's taking part in some team activities, like he's doing up to like 3-on-3s, I believe, right now. They want to see him do 5-on-5s before they clear him. They said that could be the day of a game where that they participate in that and then he's cleared. We don't know. I should in like an hour here have the injury report initially for Utah. I wouldn't expect Middleton to play yet in that game, but we just keep hearing we were hearing close. He's not far off. There's not been a setback. We heard that from Middleton about a week or so ago, but it's just like he's not fully ready yet, I guess, on this process. His body going through the multiple surgeries and now just the age on Middleton. They certainly want to be cautious and make sure that they don't bring him back too early, which they kind of did 2 years ago when he was recovering from a different offseason injury. They brought him back, and then he got hurt again and missed more time. I think they're really trying to avoid that and be incredibly cautious and ramp him up a little bit more so he's ready to go. And, I will say it worked the way they did it last season. It was unfortunate. He, basically turned both ankles on freak plays. Kevin Durant coming into his landing zone on a 3 in Phoenix, and then Siakam in the playoffs kind of ending up under him after a made basket that Chris drove to the rim. Those are what he had to get repaired. He looked great though going in, and you mentioned the stats. He was one of the best mid-range shooters in the league. His points per game was down, but his minutes were too. I think you look at his per 36 or 48 possessions or whatever, and it was relatively in line with what you'd expect from Chris Middleton. So I think the comfort is, this is a player who's been able to come back and be effective pretty quickly from these injuries, and certainly not a player whose game relies on athleticism, a tough shot taker and maker, a great catch and shoot player, which is, you can't have enough of those around Damon Giannis, especially at his size. And knowing that defenders have to key in on Damon Giannis, that again kind of makes his role easier offensively. But the bad news is we just don't know exactly when he's going to be back at this point. I would imagine it'll be, you'd hope for sure sometime this month, but there's no for sure word either way right now.
Yeah, that's tough to hear. And I was confused myself because I had heard he's targeting the beginning of the season or shortly thereafter. So I just kept hearing he's not ready. And, it kind of raises some eyebrows there, raises some concerns a little bit. Like, did he suffer a setback? Is he just recovering slower than expected? What's going on with his status? So hopefully they can get him back sooner rather than later, at least before the holidays. That would be awesome for them. One last point about the Bucks here I want to discuss with you, Ty, is honestly just the coaching situation. I'm sure you've seen all the memes, all the jokes, heard all the criticism thrown their way, talking about Doc Rivers and how a team led by Doc Rivers and Darvin Ham isn't going anywhere, and it was a terrible coaching hire. And it's clear that the results weren't great last season after Doc took the helm. Adrian Griffin had a record of 30-13 with this team. Doc was under 500 at 17-19. So definitely below expectations there, even with Middleton, even with everybody healthy, just wasn't quite what people were expecting here. And just looking how their offense operates, it's just, I wouldn't say there's anything terribly wrong with it, but, I would like to see more pick and rolls between Dame and Giannis and, little things like that, little criticisms that I have and kind of like how they run things. I know their options are limited because Middleton isn't there. So it's not like you can run the offense through a bunch of different people. So that's definitely something to consider. But I have concerns about how the season will ultimately end for them, even when Middleton is back. This roster, like you mentioned, like a lot of other people mentioned, it's a little bit on the older side, lacking athleticism. The defense isn't what it was. So I have my doubts about how far they can go with Doc Rivers at the helm. So, how are you feeling about the rest of the season, how it might play out? What do you think the ceiling for this team is? And ultimately, what are your opinions on how Doc has done so far and, what he brings to this team?
Yeah, I thought Doc did a pretty good job last season, all things considered. And I really thought in the playoffs, I don't think they had any right to push Indiana to 6 games when you look at Giannis doesn't play at all. And I think Dame, I want to say, played like parts of 3 games in the series, maybe. And I thought they really patched together an efficient, not efficient, like a functional defense against an Indiana team that stylistically was probably their worst first round cover, especially with no Giannis. I mean, the Bucks have for a long time now operated with Brook Lopez, Bobby Portis, and Giannis Antetokounmpo as their 3 bigs. With no Giannis, they just don't really have that athletic big option, which meant Miles Turner and Isaiah Jackson were able to do these high pick and rolls, and in Turner's case, pick and pops, and it was just difficult for the Bucks bigs to hang there. But Doc and Rex Kalamian was the defensive coordinator at that point, still on the staff, but they've moved over to Greg Buckner, coming from the Cavs, funny enough, given this podcast. But I thought the defense in the playoffs was great. I mean, they were finding ways to defend with Danilo Gallinari on the court. No shade, but that's an accomplishment against that Pacers team. I think this year I have not liked his rotations as much, Doc. I thought he actually leaned on the younger players more last year, but of course, that's the push and pull when you're bringing back players who were on the title team, vets like Portis and Connaughton, and then of course you're bringing in Trent, Prince, and DeLon Wright, all on vet minimums with likely some expectation from those guys that I'm going to take less money, at least in the case of Trent, maybe the others too, in exchange for, I want to roll on a good team, right? I want the opportunity to win. And then obviously, you would hope find a bigger contract in the next offseason. So I understand that it's not always an easy scenario, but I don't like how much Doc has stuck with some of the vets this year, which I'm sure, again, the Doc memes and jokes, no one is surprised to hear this. I mean, that said, Trent barely played in the second half, if at all, in that Cavs game, and we saw AJ Green and we saw Ryan Rollins. Like, there's been a movement lately, and now it's just like, will it persist? Will those young players play more? But at that, and I don't love the way their defense is playing under Buckner, but I don't think it's stylistic. I just feel like they don't seem like a well-coached team defensively. They just keep making mistakes where, some of these times you don't know, like, is this a coaching philosophy scheme, the way they practice thing, or are these players just messing up inexplicably? I would imagine it's somewhere between those two. But I don't hate schematically the way they're operating. I just think they have not been sharp enough. And I think some of that is on the players too, because you watch the Boston game, they're a lot crisper than they are against Brooklyn. And you understand the effort's going to be different on those two teams, but you can't just be looking like you don't even care against any NBA team, or you're going to get blown out of the gym. And they saw that happen in the second and third game of the year. So I'm not as obsessed with the Doc of it all as a lot of people. I think he's been okay. I think they felt like they needed someone with gravitas to get through to these guys, which it doesn't seem like Griffin was able to do. I think Doc is good for that. I think I really like the things he says about the team, the way he wants them to play. He is harped on the ball movement, the defensive awareness, and the effort and the rebounding and everything else, which those are the right things I think that they need to work on. Now it's okay. Can you get the team doing those things in a hurry? Because if not, like, what's the point? So I think it's a little complicated. I don't think he's been terrible. And I think they've had 7 games with all of Chris, Dame, and Giannis since Doc took over. So they've been pretty snake bitten with the injuries in his tenure thus far.
That is true. Yeah, I mean, context matters when it comes to the performance of these teams, these coaches. So I think it is important to consider who's playing, who's not available, who the opponents have been, and just going back to these last 2 games. I mean, a lot of positive signs there. So I think this team is capable of being very solid. And if the movement continues playing these young guys and they keep producing, then hey, it sucks for Prince and Trent and Wright, considering why they came here. But I mean, if it helps the team win games, then that matters more than anything. And plus, you're getting players that you can invest more into going forward as you get into their second contracts and all that stuff. And it really helps from a value standpoint with how constrained the team is under the luxury tax of the whole situation. So all good points. And I agree. I think this Bucks team has shown flashes, and they're on the right track. They just have to continue to lean in what they've been doing here, and hopefully those results kind of carry over into the next few games for them. So let's get on the other side of things. We talked about the Cleveland Cavaliers here a little bit and during this pod already. Now we're going to focus on them, this key opponent that the Bucks had over the last 2 games, because on the other side of things, I mean, Ty, this is crazy. You look at the standings and you see the Bucks 15th, and then you see the Cavaliers in first at 8-0. I don't think there is one person in the basketball community that would predict anything like this to happen, even in just 8 games. I mean, this is an incredible result here so far. But looking at the Cleveland Cavaliers results, I mean, just incredible stuff here. As of this recording, November 6th, about 5:45 p.m., they are 8-0. Watch them lose their next game since we're talking so great about them. So people watching this pod is like, they're 8-1 now. So, if that happens, our bad, we just jinxed them. And it's just kind of the nature of things in media. But 8-0 record, they do have some impressive wins here. The Lakers win on the 30th of October, 2 straight games against the Bucks here. The Orlando Magic win back on the 1st. And then some gimmies. You got the Wizards in there, the Raptors, the Pistons. So it's not like they've beaten quality teams every time out. But regardless, I mean, 8-0 record is great. They have a lot of big wins in this stretch. They beat the Raptors by 30, the Wizards by 19, the Lakers by 24. So you look at what this team is doing here so far, and I mean, the signs are great. Their offense is second. Their defense is 6th. Net rating is 13th. So particularly the offense is what catches my eye, because you expect a Cavaliers team with Allen and Mobley to be elite defensively. That is a given. But this team has been like annually, they usually finish about the middle of the pack offensively. So looking at this number 2 rating, just incredible stuff. And I think there's several reasons for that. First of all, they're playing faster. You look at their pace this season. I mean, they're top 10 in pace. They were bottom third last year in pace. They went from about 97 possessions per 48 to about 100 possessions per 48. So that definitely helps them get more shots and get more chances at getting baskets here. More drives per game, about 10 more drives per game over last year. That definitely comes into play when you're looking at Mobley's game. I think he is one of the biggest beneficiaries of this new offense, this new high octane, high tempo offense. They're 8th in 3-point attempts. That's a 16% increase over last year. So this Cavs offense overall is just more modern. You're seeing a lot of teams do this, especially the star players on some of these teams, more threes, more quick threes, and that's kind of juicing up some of these offensive ratings here. And they definitely have every part of this big four here playing at a high level. So obviously Mobley is bringing a lot to the table. He's super aggressive. That's something that I noticed in those 2 Bucks games. I mean, he's not getting the ball in the mid-range and just trying to be a playmaking hub and get up threes. I mean, he's taking it to Brook Lopez and Bobby Portis. I mean, he's not backing down. He's getting shots in the paint, high quality looks, high percentage looks. So that's been great for the Cavaliers. And then Jarrett Allen has been fantastic. I mean, nightly double-double threat, 1.4 blocks per game. He's been fantastic so far. And that's key because they invested even more money into Allen this summer. I mean, a $90 million extension. So now, I mean, if you go look at the couple seasons from now, they have $164 million committed just to those 4 players. So looking at how much this team has invested in those players and how much faith they put in them, bringing guys back. They could have traded Mitchell. They could have traded Garland, but they stuck to the core, and the results have been nothing short of spectacular so far. Putting Dean Wade in the starting lineup, things have been interesting from a rotation standpoint. So Dean Wade brings size along with the 3-point shooting. I think that is key as well. So those are a few of the big takeaways I have so far about why this team has been so good. They really just kind of match that elite offense with the defense we've come to expect from them, and just kind of clean some things up. So credit to the coaching staff as well as the players. I think Kenny Atkinson, again, is kind of displaying his prowess here. He kind of displayed that a little bit here back when he was with the Brooklyn Nets, bringing that team to the playoffs. So he has way more weapons this time, way more options, and he's taking full advantage of every player. And I mean, one last point I'll make before I hand it over to you, Ty, is it seems to me as though they're relying less on Donovan Mitchell than they have at any point in his tenure. You don't see them looking to him to generate some kind of look for them. It's Garland getting some good looks, shooting the lights out. I mean, well over 40% on the season. And then Mobley and Allen just finding ways to work together in tandem has been so impressive. So yes, Donovan will go off at times. That's who he is. He's a great player, but they're not just looking to him to make a play. I mean, everybody can make plays here, and the role players have been great as well. Sam Merrill has had some great minutes here. Karis LeVert doing what he does off the bench. So they're getting contributions from across the roster, and it's giving them wins here so far. So that's kind of the story through 8 games. But Ty, do you feel as though this team, I mean, how surprised are you, I guess, first of all, that they're starting this strong? And then how confident are you in that this can continue over the next several games?
Yeah, I mean, you're always a little surprised when you see 8-0 if you're not talking about like Boston or maybe Oklahoma City coming into the season. I think I had some questions about the Cavs, mostly because their last season was so strange. I mean, they were relatively healthy and it felt like kind of stuck in the doldrums. And then around, like, I think when the year flipped, January-ish, is they had players in and out of the lineup and it felt like they didn't have their whole team. And they kind of just tore off a ton of wins. And I don't know if something just clicked then for the players or what, but I wanted to see this year, okay, what do the big four look like? Are they going to be able to build off of the strong play, or is it going to go back into the inconsistent play? And I think Atkinson, to your point, their new coach, has done a good job putting them in better positions. But I think the number one thing for me with the Cavs, and this has been something that, talked about with Cavs people for a while, like what is the leap for Mobley if it happens? What does that mean for them? And I think going back to last season, when I would talk to people around the Cavs, it's like, that's really what they need, right? Like that, Max Strus was a nice addition. He hasn't even played yet, by the way, so that's really impressive that they've won all those games without him. Nice addition, but that he's a nice role player, right? They need someone else outside of Garland and Mitchell who can really be taking a load off of them and just shifting how the floor looks. I think, last season, although they had a great season at the end of the day, I think it was probably a little bit too much of just those two guys alternating possessions. And then one of them kind of stands there, and then, the rest of the floor is what it is. I think being able to give Mobley so many shots and let him actually create as a big wing hub, basically, versus just out of the post, but really, bring the ball up sometimes and create, then that just makes it so much harder to guard them. Because their issue, it felt like, was you got Mobley and Allen. If all the small guards, Mitchell and Garland, are on the ball all the time, like, how do you space the floor? If Mobley's not going to be a great shooter, Allen hasn't even shot a three yet this year. They're just kind of in the way. Now that you're tilting the floor differently, Mobley's having the ball more, and you have to respect him more on it. It just feels like everything is opened up for them. They're faster. They're shooting more threes. I still think their wing rotation outside of the starters is a little shaky to me, but I think they're just going to be so good with their primary core players. And now with Mobley playing the way he's playing, nearly scoring as much per game as Garland, 17.6 to 20.5 points per game, that I just think they're so much harder to guard. They're so much less stagnant than they were a year ago. And defensively, they're still just really good because, when you have the base of Allen at the rim and Mobley as the helper, you're just going to be it's going to be hard to score. You're going to have a great base defense there. So I'm not shocked they're winning. I wasn't totally sold on them, but they've clearly proved me wrong pretty quickly. Also, shout out to Ty Jerome, who I think is doing remarkable work as kind of their third ball handling guard, or fourth if you count Levert. I think that was kind of underrated, his injuries last year for them, and he's been pretty helpful so far.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm glad you brought up Ty Jerome. He's a player that I didn't really pay much attention to, and I'm sure many others don't either. They just see that name on the roster, and they're like, okay, he'll come in and play 10 minutes a game, and he'll be at the back of the bench, and he'll be a garbage time guy. But I mean, comes in and just makes plays. And I think most of us assume that Craig Porter Jr. would be getting a lot of those minutes kind of like in a backup role. But I mean, here comes Ty Jerome, just being that guy on the court that you might think you can kind of just relax off of and not really pay a ton of attention to. But here he comes making plays inside and out, taking care of the ball, being a good, strong, reliable guard for the Cavaliers. So I think another point for their depth. Their overall rotation looks great. And like you said, this is without Max Strus. He hasn't played a game. So if they can do all of this without Max Strus, and some games without Karis LeVert, he's missed a couple of games here so far. I think the last couple of games. So not having their full roster, but still being able to produce such great results is a really great marker, a key sign of a winning team. I think that's one of the things you look at with true contenders is, can you take care of business? Can you win the games you're supposed to win? Do you have the depth to withstand key injuries? Are you consistent from night to night? Do you have an identity? And this team is just really, they've found another identity. They had one last season, which was, we're going to just put teams in the mud. They're not going to be able to get any easy baskets against us. And then this season, I mean, like you said, it's like this empowering Mobley movement. It's been awesome to see. Really fun stuff watching him operate and just have all this confidence. I think in years past, you would see him just kind of, you get the ball at the mid post and he would do a couple of dribbles left to right, looking for a handoff or just trying to throw up a mid-range shot and see what happens. But this year he's committed, he's driven, he's focused to, again, just put pressure on the defense at the rim. And that's really key for a player like him that's come in with questions about his size, his weight, his strength. he's addressed all of those. He looks way stronger, and it's doing wonders for their offense, along with just all these other things. So you brought up last season how those two in the front court were just looking for ways to coexist, and you also brought up their crazy win streak, like in the January February timeframe. I can't remember exactly what the record was, 20-1 or something like that, something crazy. But
Yeah.
in that stretch, it's interesting because I mean you have to remember that I believe Mobley was out for that stretch, so it was really just Allen carrying the load, and they weren't completely healthy. So we would see these modern lineups to where you have Allen at the five, and you could have a typical floor spacing four. So whether that's Strus or you have Dean Wade, somebody like that, just stretching the floor, that's where the results were most positive. It wasn't those two playing together. So now coming into this season, they're saying like, hey, we can be that good with both of us on the floor. It says a lot to the amount of confidence that the team has in those two and how committed those two are to working together. So all great signs so far from the Cavs. That front court has been awesome. And then the backcourt, having, again, Garland and Mitchell there to, yes, sometimes they will get hot and just kind of bail out the offense, but it's not required anymore. It's not a necessity to get off good shots and to be a good offensive team. So, I mean, Garland is shooting the lights out, like I mentioned before. But he's also he has a good balance between playmaking for others and generating shots himself. He's had a few games already where he's been over 30 points, but he has 2 games to where he only had 11 or 12 points, but he had 10 assists. So you can see that Garland, he knows when to back off and get other guys involved and also make plays on the ball. So I think that's a sign of maturity for him that also helps the Cavs quite a bit. So I mean, I'm super impressed, and I think they keep this going, especially if Mobley continues to be as confident as he is, and the shots just keep falling for the rest of the players on the roster that are looked upon to get up those shots.
They had an 18-2 run last year. They dropped to 18-15 after a loss to the Raptors in Toronto, and then ripped off an 18-2 run right before All-Star. So they went from 18-15 to 36-17. And then actually had a pretty, I think then the injuries kind of caught up more, actually a bad end of the season. They ended 48-34 after all that. So just, kind of like a typical up and down start to the year, crazy win streak, really tough post All-Star break for them. Just like a really odd season, but nice to see for their sake that, starting it out on the right note here. Now I'm sure for the Cavs, the next step to being like an elite team, a contending team is let's not have the, 2 months of the season where we can't string wins together. It's now, you're not going to be, winning 8 out of 10 or 8 out of 8 every time, but, can you avoid the long, prolonged issues? And I think it is a good sign for them that they've won all these games with guys out of the lineup. It hasn't been perfect conditions. So we'll see from here, but I think they're in a really good spot. There's just a lot of talent here, even if the roster's, a little imbalanced. I think you'd probably, if you were drawing up a perfect roster, it wouldn't be, Mobley maybe not a true big anymore, but kind of a big with Allen. And then, of course, you have your 2 guards. You'd like a more typical wing, like a 6'8" guy, but that's okay. You'd rather have 4 good players than, 3 good players and 1 worse good player. So one less good player, I should say.
No, exactly. That's a great point. Yeah, I guess that's really the only real nitpick that I have with this team is just the overall roster construction, how the wing rotation looks, especially if Karis LeVert is going to be down. It leaves them a little bit thin there. So, I mean, Dean Wade can masquerade as a 3 sometimes, playing with Mobley and Allen. That really helps having him in the lineup. But after that, it's a little shaky. I mean, you have Okoro, another guy they re-signed this summer. He was restricted free agent. They brought him back, and he's had his moments. He hasn't. I don't think he's quite shot the ball as well as he did last year, but he still brings in a lot of grit, a lot of effort, really solid defense. Being able to put him on guys like Damian Lillard and Curry and other strong wings and guards definitely helps them. So, and he's another big part of their defensive identity. Them being top 10 every single season. I think he's a big part of that. So you need him to kind of tie together the front court, the back court. The front court is awesome. The back court, not so much defensively. I think it's just a testament to the overall how great those two are as far as being rim protectors, rim deterrents, overall defensive pest. Having Garland and Mitchell there, I mean, both guys are 6'3" and under, not the best defensive players. So the fact that they can still generate top 5, top 6 defenses every year is really impressive. And I don't think that's going to go anywhere. I think it's going to continue. The offense is the question. Can you stay in the top 10 offensively the entire season? And like you said, Ty, the consistency is key. That's really going to put them in the thick of the title chase here. Are they going to really seriously threaten Boston? I don't know about that. I have my questions. But, I mean, really after that, I think it's pretty wide open. I mean, the Sixers have had their issues. I mean, they're barely ahead of the Bucks in the standings. They're 14th as of this recording. And then you have the Bucks down there in 15th right now. I mean, you look at the Magic are missing Paolo right now. So, I mean, they could be in for a really rough few weeks here in the season. So, I mean, the door's open for the Cavaliers to make a serious run here. The Pacers have had ups and downs. So, I mean, if we're looking at a prime opportunity for the Cavaliers to work their way into the conversation, I think this is the time for them to make a move there.
Yeah, I mean, I think their goal right now should be let's us and Boston finish some order of 1-2. If you're the Cavs, you'd love to be 1, but finish the top 2 seed. Because then you go into the playoffs knowing, okay, to your point, we won't see Boston until the potential Eastern Conference Finals. Yeah, are we going to be favored in a Knicks rematch? Are we going to be favored against Philly or against Milwaukee? Maybe not. But if you're the Cavs, why wouldn't you feel like you could beat? I think the team should feel like they can beat anyone. But let's put Boston aside. Feel good about beating anyone but Boston. I think if you're the Cavs, you can get yourself to a conference finals without LeBron, which God they haven't done since whatever the '80s or something like that. The non-LeBron version. Maybe early 90s. And I think that is a huge accomplishment. And you never know in the playoffs. I mean, the story of last playoffs to a certain extent, outside of just Boston, was, these poor timed injuries can just derail a team's playoffs. I mean, it felt like half the field was losing someone crucial and it just changed their trajectory. If you're the Cavs and you can get to the third round, you just never know. I mean, I obviously wish everyone was healthy every playoffs and we got to see the teams at full strength, but we know that's not how it works. And that's the benefit of being this great regular season team is, seeing like, I don't know, who's it going to be? Atlanta or Toronto or someone like that in the first round versus, being stuck with Milwaukee, Philly. Although the way Milwaukee and Philly are playing, maybe the 2 seed will see them in the first round. We'll have to see on that one. But you'd hope at least you get a chance at a bit of an easier path to get through and, win some playoff series, which should always be the goal for a team this good.
Absolutely, man. 100%. So, yeah, I mean, we have 2 teams here that are opposite sides of the spectrum, but it's a long season. We're barely 2 weeks into this thing, and things can change really quickly. I mean, all it's going to take is a 3-0 run from the Bucks, 0-3 run from the Cavaliers, and this conversation is totally different. So we're going to have to keep tabs on how these teams are doing, and I'm definitely going to be watching the Bucks close because I have doubts, but I know they're better than the record. They can definitely hang with some of the better teams in the conference, and especially when they get Middleton back. I mean, they're going to be dangerous. I really believe once they get a guy back that lethal, they can make some noise there. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But I think that's all I have for this podcast, Ty. Thanks again for coming on. This has been a great conversation here. Really enjoyed what you brought to the conversation as far as the Bucks and the Cavaliers. Even though it was a couple of tough losses over on the Bucks side. I'm sure that it's there's still some good things to take away from those 2 losses here, man. So I want to let you go ahead and give you a chance to just shout out your pod one more time and where the listeners can find you if they're looking for some Bucks coverage.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter and now on Blue Sky as of today at Ti Windisch, TiWindisch, and then the Euro or Gyro, however you pronounce it, wherever you're located, the Gyro Step Podcast, GYRO, the Greek play there. Wherever you get this fine podcast on your audio platforms or on YouTube, we are doing 1 to 2, if not more, episodes per week every week. We have other Bucks content there as well, so we are going to be churning out episodes all season long, whether the Bucks are winning or losing. We sure hope it's winning to at least a little bit more than so far, but we'll be there regardless, covering all things Milwaukee Bucks.
Love to hear it and see it, man. That's some great stuff, and I hope things continue to go well for you guys this season, regardless of the result in the standings here. Uh, if everybody listening, if you guys enjoy this kind of content, you want to see more of it, head over to our website, notradeclause.com. And we also have some social pages where you can find more content that we produce over the course of the season. That's going to be No Trade Clause, one word, over on Instagram, Twitter, X. You can find us at @notrade_clause. That's where we put our graphics, we put podcast clips, even more great content that you guys can check out and really sink your teeth into. So we hope to see you over there. But that's going to do it for this podcast. Thanks again, everybody, for sticking with us to this point. We will be back on a weekly basis, starting here, going throughout the season with even more content with great guests like Ti covering the NBA at large. So take care, everybody, and we hope to see you on the next installment of NTC.